Okay, so today we're welcoming to the channel Viivi, and she's from Finland. She was so kind to come and have a little chat about some experiences she's had in her life. So welcome, Viivi.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, nice to have you.
Yeah, nice to be here.
Yeah. So take us back to earlier in life, whenever it feels relevant to describe kind of how things were for you when you were younger or before some
Right.
changes in your experience.
Yeah. Um, well, I mean, I would say starting from really, really early age, this whole experience of entanglement with the persona and conceptual identity and all of that started to form, like, I don't even know how young, but at really young age, it just felt very, very like uncomfortable and unnatural, and I could never really be part of it socially. So starting from that time, everything started to be very, very heavy, and of course I didn't know why. And
I can
so
relate.
that, yeah,
I can
I did.
definitely relate to that. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess everyone doesn't experience it to the same degree, but for me it was a very, very internally painful experience.
Mhm.
And so that started the whole thing. And what ended up happening in my case, that I got involved with kind of very religious, dogmatic spirituality for 10 years of my life, like between the years of 20 and 30. And that ended up adding a lot more baggage to the whole thing, actually, like a lot more conditioning and also traumatic experience that needed to be then later addressed when the actual awakening process started to unfold. So I went through the whole thing of spiritual seeking and yeah, but I don't really want to go more into that because
that's okay. I can relate also to just listening to how this played out for you, because when I was growing up, I felt such a something wasn't right about the way it felt to be around other humans. There was some, and I know exactly what it was. I was picking all of their energy up and their repressed emotions. I could feel it all, but I didn't know what it was, and it felt so sort of not right. But then I also didn't get fully involved, but it came into contact with different like methods or religions, or people that sort of said, oh, we figured this out, let us show you what we figured out, how to feel better, how to figure life out. And it didn't feel better. It felt like more of the same, but with a different flavor maybe. But then, as you said, like sooner or later you start to feel these weird control mechanisms built into it, which makes it worse.
Yeah, and actually I felt I was much more in touch with the suffering, like before getting involved with this type of spirituality that just suppresses the whole thing. And kind of artificially, I don't know, dissociates, at least it was like that for me, from like somatic sensations and from the internal pain, and all of that.
So where'd you go from there?
From where did I go from there? Well then, and I don't know, I can only explain it that it just grace, like everything that at the end of that period of my life, that 10 years of period, I just happened to go for a trip, kind of really randomly to Hawaii, to Kauai. And I remember when I first time somehow landed there and felt the natural world and the elements, and it was so vibrant and just so like the texture of the senses and everything was so rich and so present. And I felt like in my body for the first time, like since childhood, and kind of just fell into this really like unknown place, or kind of more just vulnerable place where everything got a little bit more quiet. And yeah, then there was just this voice, I guess, like a wordless voice, intuition, but also I've been totally severed from that. So I guess that's the first time that I really felt it and heard it. And And it was just kind of telling me to come back there, to kind of just leave my life behind, whatever I had been doing, and just come back to this place and just spend time there like indefinitely without no any reason at all. And yeah, I really can't explain how, but somehow I managed to do that. Like somehow I managed to pull myself out of that life situation and environment that I had been involved with, and just do that kind of leap to the unknown, basically.
That is a big leap. I mean, that's literally on the other side of the world from Finland, right? I mean, it's pretty much as far as you can get away.
Yeah.
Wow. Very cool. So you moved it.
While I was, what's that?
So you moved there.
Kind of. I mean, you know how it is in US. You can't easily move there. So I was traveling, having kind of more nomad type of lifestyle, you know, and I don't know, everything just suddenly conspired for that to happen. So yeah. And while I was there on the island, or on the island Kauai, I just felt called to do this type of retreats, like alone. There was this place which was really like isolated. You could just hike in there and spend time without meeting anyone for days and days. So I just felt called to do that, just to be in nature and meditate, but without, again, it was just intuition. And I would do those type of retreats like for like 5, 6, 7 days, quite a few times during my time there on the island. And on one of those retreats, well, there happened something, you know, that I still can't really like explain, but that was like the opening, and it was very powerful. It wasn't like a subtle opening. It was I guess that type of thing that people refer to like Kundalini awakening, but or Shaktipat, but I didn't call it like that at the time. I didn't call it anything, and really, I mean, and even I had all this background of spirituality and all of it. It was so wildly different than anything that I could have ever imagined, and it was so obvious that it had nothing to do with that type of dogmatic spirituality, because it was a direct thing and very, very it really hit me very deep, very, very in a very deep way. And so that kind of shifted everything, kind of the orientation in life, and it kind of felt like it entered to the foundations of my life somehow. But I at the time, I couldn't really understand or necessarily talk about it or articulate it. And I never talked about this actually anyone at that time, but it kind of felt like it entered there and started to slowly loosen stuff. And kind of like an earthquake, right? Like some people, I guess, can experience the same thing, but it can be really subtle, like when you feel the first hit. And then some people, like for me, the hit was like really powerful, but it doesn't really matter. But after that, there will be more and more that type of hits, like openings, like glimpses and glimpses and glimpses. And so that kept going on for like 3 years. And then everything just fell apart, like internally and externally, basically.
Yeah, I can relate to this first opening. Like for me, it felt very much like what you're describing. More than, I mean, I hear it described in many ways, and I always feel pretty connected to what people are saying. Like it's pretty obvious what I would call an awakening and when that fundamental shift in identity actually occurs and when it doesn't. But they're all quite different. This one sounds very similar to what I experienced, just the way you're describing it. And it's so fundamental, and it's so deep. And I didn't have anything to say about it. It's just and it was also nothing spiritual. It didn't feel like anything I had ever, at least what I had ever perceived spirituality was in any way. It wasn't any of that. It was just beyond. But I can relate for sure. And then you said even 3 years later, there was a different kind of shift or a more.
I mean, that's like this, what I just described, this like opening, it was still an experience, right? So I mean, it definitely like kind of like something, it was an opening that in certain way never closed, but it was an experience that after that I would go back into that type of like identity and person and images, and all of that was still there.
Yeah.
And I would say when everything fall apart, that 3 years later, that was when the actual and then the shedding process began, and it kind of launched me into this type of dark night. Like 4 years, very, very difficult. I mean, again, I don't think it necessarily has to be that difficult, but for some reason for me it was like very, very difficult. And
can you say a little bit about that? Because I think a lot of people don't, until it happens, they don't quite make the connection between, well, if all boundaries disappear and your sense of inside and outside, if that's all gone, isn't it just peaceful beyond that? How can you still feel pain? How can you feel contraction, or maybe not contraction, but like that intense shadows material, right? I totally believe you, and I know exactly what you mean, but just to clarify for people who they don't always get this, I noticed, because they ask about it quite a bit.
Yeah, so what happened for me was that this type of conceptual narrative of my life that somehow had still remained intact after that first awakening, it hadn't like, it was still there. So that completely collapsed, like that type of meaning, like conceptual meaning of life. So it kind of felt like a lot of conditioning fell away, actually kind of mostly all the spiritual conditioning that I was carrying in my system. But what was left was still this type of really core woundings, like kind of really, really early traumatic kind of stuff that are at the sense of separation. So there was still enough identity left in them. So, but there was nothing more left than that. So it was thoroughly devastating. Like it was kind of felt like before that, I would have this really beautiful relationship with the divine, kind of mystical. So when that collapse happened, that internal collapse, that was what fell away. That's how it felt like. It was like there's kind of like there's no God anymore. That type of experience fell away, and it was thoroughly devastating. And all these powerful and beautiful experiences that I used to have, all these glimpses and of unity and pure nothingness, they just completely stopped. And I was suddenly there facing like everything that I've avoided and repressed and numbed in my life, but there was like no medication suddenly, like nothing worked. And I was totally alone at that point for some reason. I didn't have any teachers or friends around who could relate to it. So it was very, very, well, yeah, solitary experience like that.
Yeah. No coping mechanisms left, no ability to filter or avoid anything. And you feel all of the repressed material full on without a filter and can't avoid it.
Yeah. And suddenly no spirituality, like nothing to explain anything, like just.
Yeah.
And it was very confusing because I had these powerful experiences. If I actually would not have had them, it could have been easier, but the mind was grasping a lot on all of that. It was suddenly not there. It was still like holding this idea that awakening is an experience that can become permanent. And for some reason, it had a really hard time letting go of all those things, like the most precious things that ever happened to me, kind of like carrying inside those experiences. I couldn't like do that anymore because it was so obvious that like anything experiential is going to come and go. So
that's a really important, you're making so many, I'm sorry I'm interrupting you, but I want to open these points up because they're really important points. That's a big one, is when you really start going through the heavy shadow material, your mind will want to recreate the awakening. That's the best thing that ever happened. You want to get into that place of clarity. I remember it so clear. It was clear, it was peaceful and flow, and it was just so much fluidity, and you want that back. But the part of you that wants that back is the part that's going away. It
exactly.
never really existed. And so you have nowhere to hide from this really dense energies. It's energy essentially. And it's energy plus resistance. Like that's what gets worked out, is the intense amount of resistance around all this deep energy that created that world that was the self that started seeking and became an awakened self and all of that stuff.
Yeah, and it's very physical, of course, the
Yeah,
resistance,
very
like all
physical.
the patterns and all of it, the mind reality is very rooted in physicality. So very visceral process like that. But yeah, but after 4 years of that, and actually in the middle of it, there was a kind of opening, kind of like very weirdly, kind of like a sense of what's going to come after. Then a little bit of something like, and then it kind of closed back again. But then, yeah, at the end of that period of time, there was then like what I would call the first shift, like a permanent shift of awakeness. And it was very interesting because it was so different than the previous powerful experiences. Like before, they had always been very, very, like I say, like kind of, yeah, powerful. And this one was like nothing like that. I was simply like coming in touch with a kind of like a sense of how it felt to be when I was young. And there was like a sense suddenly like, hey, there's this really weird emptiness or kind of like openness, and which was interpreted as lack. So I was kind of reliving that type of thing, and I was suddenly like, hey, I've been turning away from this my whole life, but none of it was like verbal. I wasn't thinking about anything when this happened, but there was a sense that I've been turning away from this inexplicable nothingness in the center of my experience all my life, because it's been interpreted as something lacking and something wrong with me. And suddenly I was like, hey, I'm turning towards it. And then there was like a just like stepping into it and kind of like becoming it. But I mean, it's what I am and what everything is and what's always been like that. But it kind of feels like stepping into it. But it all happened somehow out of exhaustion, because at that point I was so tired after all of this internal tremendous pressure during these years that in the end, the resistance was just not there. So it just happened kind of like, like stumbling into it, at the most unexpected moment and place. And I definitely wasn't trying to do anything spiritual in that moment. So that happened. And then there was just suddenly like, whoa, there's this pure openness, just this like totally indescribable. And it's like, I was, and this recognition, like, that's.
Say that one more time.
Like is recognition somehow, but there's no words, but it recognizes itself that this is what I am. And there would just be like really no experimental byproducts, but there was this kind of it was very funny, because I was like, I've been looking my whole life for what I am, and I thought it was just like insanely funny.
Yeah.
And there was a sense of relief, of course. There was like this tremendous burden and all this very difficult period of this dark night. It was just like evaporated like that, like completely gone. And that opening never closed for me, that openness. So it's been like that ever since. But that was almost like just the beginning, because that openness would then just keep opening and keep expanding, and then it would go beyond like kind of anything I could have imagined. So yeah,
beautiful. I love that whole story, all of the nuances, all the twists and turns. Like truly that's one of the most remarkable awakening stories I've heard. A lot of them too, but it's also just so it just so points out all of the nuances and twists and turns of this. And it's also very relatable. It's so relatable. It's just that you didn't do this as a spiritual process, like per se. It wasn't planned. It was full on.
Yeah, it's so natural and so simple. And what's the really funny thing about it, it actually took me more than half a year from that to actually realize it had nothing to do with this whole non-dual thing that I was into earlier in my life. That's how different it was, the actual shift, when it was like a permanent moment-to-moment experience. Because initially it was very, first kind of like neutral, but then it was just there was none of those spectacular elements present, for the first, like, I don't know, half a year that followed. It was just simple presence, just, like that.
In
So,
Dzogchen, the Dzogchen, they have this term empty clarity, which is really what it all comes down to at some point.
yeah.
Which is a pretty good description. Yeah. Wow.
So what happened then was something really, like, it was like, I don't know, it was like maybe a month after that, I happened to read a book, and it's written by someone, like a non-dual person who's not really a teacher, but he described like his process of awakening, this type of very, very intense process, and going like all the way, this kind of very single pointed, like as fast as possible to ultimate truth, absolute, whatever you want to call it, that type of thing. So I read that, and then it was on the background of abiding 1 month in this very strange openness, that was just like total unknowing kind of. And that was kind of like a spark, like it just, because how he ended the book, he kind of just summarized shortly, like, this is what this thing is about. It can be done, by anyone. The price is everything, but he said you can do it, And it was that words. I mean, the book is great, but it was those last words that were really like that conviction, and it just, because I knew that openness was the truth, and I knew that it's what I am, but it wasn't yet clear exactly like what its nature, something like that. So it was like an opening to something, and I didn't know what, and I knew that there's more, but the more is not anymore that seeking thing, that seeks for something external or experience or anything like that. So there was this beautiful thing of abiding in that, and the seeking thing was completely gone. And at the same time, this really burning, like, desire, like almost like really compelling, like, I mean, it was super compelling, like it became just like so fascinating and interesting, and just like I didn't think about anything else for the next period of my life. And that was like then 1 year and 8 months being in this type of internal space of just total single focused and kind of kind of like inquiry, I guess, but it wasn't that clean and that type of thing that I can really even explain. I felt there was like this really kind of fierce energy, like a wrathful energy, actually, and it was all happened here. None of it happened here, but it was using like this faculty of discernment and just untying, like everything untying in the system. It was very kind of embodied, and I had a lot of energetics related to it, and so it was kind of messy, but also very lucid, and kind of ecstatic, actually, but not easy. There would be a lot of moments that were very difficult, and some like life situations, relationship situations that were just mirroring me right there where I was holding on, and there was just nothing to do. It's just I couldn't hide anywhere. It would just keep going on like 24 hours a day and 7 days a week, and
that is so beautiful. There's an ox herding picture, like it's called the 6th ox herding picture. It's this Zen series that shows like awakening steps and all this or whatever, but the 6th one is so interesting. It's when he gets on the ox. You're riding the ox, your true nature, and he's playing a flute, and he's riding it backwards. He's not in charge of where he's going, but he says, my flute intones throughout the night. Anyone who hears this will follow me. Gain and loss are over. They're assimilated. There's no where I'm going, but where this bull is going, and that's exactly how that feels. It's just like it's full on 24/7, a roller coaster you can't get off of. But there is discernment, there's clarity there, and yet it can be still very gritty, very direct, intense, physical, energetic.
That's beautiful. I love that. It's like one like wild trust to the unknown, and it just keeps on going, and it's and there's no guarantee of anything and that's the beauty of it. It's just, otherwise it wouldn't be unconditional. And there's no plan B or anything like that. And it was so, I never felt as alive, as as when all of that. And I felt like my life conditions had all just like come to that perfect place, you know, when that spark happened. And it felt like everything inside of me was like, finally it's happening, you know. And it's like, it felt so good. And it's kind of like it knows exactly where it's going, even you don't know nothing. It's just,
yeah. That's so beautiful.
But yeah, I do have this lineage background, and the lineage that I have, it's non-dual Shaiva Tantra. So it kind of came back to me at some point during this period of time. Everything fell away when I went through the dark night, like everything, but it kind of weirdly reappeared at that point. And so I was also like really loving those practices, and they were just so beautiful. It was more like all happening from the point of exploration, like, because kind of weird combination of that burning desire and at the same time just falling in love with reality as it is, and just the being itself, like exploring itself through the practice and through everything what was happening. But on the background there was always this great intensity and this great like determination. And so yeah. And somewhere towards the end of this period, there was it was interesting because it just came to a place where it suddenly was like indicated that to kind of desire anything other than what's happening in the moment is to deny the truth. So first it was like this burning desire for truth, but then it was kind of like being asked to surrender even that, first giving everything to it. It was very interesting. I can't really explain it. And at that point, I wasn't really even suffering anymore. Like, I mean, it was very minimal at that point, like whatever was left. So it was actually a really great place to be. But at the same time, I knew it wasn't finished, it wasn't done. But at the same time, there was this clear invitation to just kind of fall in love with the reality as it manifests moment to moment. And
yeah,
because that's the truth, right? What else could it be? And it was very obvious that it's like that. And so when that happened, then maybe a month after that, then there was a kind of then final, I don't know what to call it, like a release, kind of energetic release into boundlessness, and kind of the inner and outer collapsed, and the subject and objects, and I mean the perceiver and perceived and perception collapsed into one, like seamlessly, just one. And it all happened like it was kind of like one thing and after another. It would be like an unfolding, and it would just keep on opening and opening and opening and opening. Yeah. Or you would say it just kept collapsing and collapsing and collapsing and collapsing. So it was, and after being in that type of internal mode of 1 year and 8 months, where it was so focused, you know, all my will and all my life force, I was just channeling into that. So it's kind of like very powerful thing, you know, and the lifetime of suffering and everything what was left in the system, like confusion and disappointment and disillusionment. So all channeled into that. When it then finally releases, I mean, it's kind of like, well, there's going to be like expansion kind of, and something like that, I guess.
Yeah. I love what you said a couple steps ago. You're saying so much. It has so much nuance. But I don't want to stop you because I love the way you're saying it. A couple steps ago, you mentioned that at some point you fell in love with the process. You fell in love. I totally know what you mean when you say even the search for truth, wordless truth, instinctual truth, whatever, even that will have to collapse, because you're going to have everyone's going to have some filters still about what that even means. And it's going to feel like some universal truth or something's going to be there. That's got to go. And then it's like you do fall in love with this just as it is. There's just nothing but this, whatever is even arising or non-arising. There's nothing else. But there's something so beautiful about that. It's austere in one sense. But sometimes even at this stage, people will have a fixation because it's like, but I want something else to be here. I want there to be something, a universal truth, a universal consciousness, a universal self, something like there's still just a little bit of wanting left, but it's a very mature and important step to just fall right in love with just this as it is, what's here and what's not here. It's perfect just the way it is. I don't know why it is. I don't know what it is. It's nothing about knowing. It's pure full-on experience, and that is a kind of love. It's a kind of unconditional love, unconditioned by my expectation of what should or shouldn't be here. And I know exactly what you mean when that leads directly into this this collapsing, because for me sometimes I've described it as scaffolding. One collapses and then it hits the next one and collapsed and collapsed. That's how it felt like me when the physical world just deconstructed itself. Like when I say the physical world, it's like, the sense of inside and outside being opposed to one another and being able to even construct that, the sense of form, there being objects in 3 dimensions, all of it was seen to be another extrapolation of an expectation here, pushed outward. That was never really there. It was not there at all. And that collapsing into, can't even really give it a word. I could call it clarity. I could call it anything, but even that could be misinterpreted because it's not even nothing. It's not, it's not an it, and so it's just this arising however it is in the moment, which is so perfect in a sense, but it doesn't need to be anything. And so I just wanted to
that has become the goal, kind of, I guess
Again?
this phase is kind of like the path has become the goal. So just walking the path, it's the goal, and that's the surrender, I guess. Yeah,
I love it. Dogen used the term practice enlightenment. It was one word, like they're the same thing. Practicing, even when you're a seeming beginner, confused and lost and don't know had no insight yet, that is also enlightenment. The path is the goal of the path. Every step on the path is the completion of the path. Every doubt is enlightenment. So it's all quite miraculous in that way. And you have to go through some of that really heavy stuff that you described so well. Most people do. I mean, everybody goes through some of it. I think some people it's a lot more intense than others, but
yeah.
So now what do you do?
So this was like 1.5 years ago, what this I don't know, release. And I guess there was like a few months after that where it was kind of like settling, and there was this sense of like first this expansion, and then the expansion in itself kind of just settled in this just pure non-substantiality and pure infinity. There's no more expansion or contraction or anything like that happening. And then it kind of took a moment, like it took those few months to actually come aware that something wasn't there anymore that used to be there. So when that whole collapsing thing happened, it kind of collapsed all the way to the, what I would call like the void, like infinite potentiality or absolute, but there's just words for something. It's and then something like never returned from there. And what I mean with that, it wasn't just that type of sense of separation, but also that pure essence, like that, just that sense when consciousness rests in itself, that when you turn inwards and it's just like resting like that. So that also fell away. So I had this moment a few months later after this that I would try to turn inwards and kind of, there wasn't but to do that thing, and it's just, there wasn't inward anymore, but that movement of the mind would still happen, like, and try to kind of search for the inwards, but there's no inwards and there's no outwards. There's just and that was I guess disorienting for a moment and very confusing also, and kind of very mysterious, and also it felt also very like kind of really beautiful in a way and very innocent, because it was like the loss of the, you could say, the awakened self or the unified self, or that type of thing. And when that goes, then there's actually like the loss of all identity, no need to anymore hold on to any identity, something like that, I guess, because that was like the final really subtle kind of attachment. But I wouldn't have noticed it while it's there, and I don't think it's possible to notice it while it's there. But when it's not there, then it's suddenly clear what it is, basically.
Yes. So what you're describing, I'm 99.9% sure is what I would call, or what Buddhism would call, the realization of no self. That it's the most fundamental layer that makes any self possible. It's the fundamental layer that makes any ability to collect experience into a sense of any inward world at all. Adyashanti has described it as your inner world just disappears absolutely. And I think that's very accurate.
Yeah. And there was kind of weird grief related to that. And for a while, and again, the mind would do a little bit of this thing where it would kind of crash towards what is not there anymore, and also like this inward turning movement of the mind, it would still kind of kept happening every now and then there would just be the absence, right? Absence of basically everything that used to be there, and then that. But that's just a state of mind, and kind of that type of blankness or absence, and instantly when that movement would relax, and it would just relax every now and then and just be relaxed and not happen, then it's obvious kind of that this, whatever this is, it's really like beyond any words to describe. It's I mean, no self is great description, but it's a negation, and the actual mode is very affirmative. But in the beginning it didn't feel like that, because that movement of the mind would come back, it would again look inwards, and kind of there would be all kind of like sometimes even terror a little bit related to that, not a lot, flashes of terror and a kind of deep sense of like aloneness, but not loneliness, not that type of separation, but like deep aloneness kind of, and kind of really bare. It felt very bare and raw, like there's just no buffer anymore, not even that transparent self. So I kind of feel that it really takes a while that no self mode can actually start to blossom in the experience, and it can only start to blossom after this inward turning movement of the mind ceases completely, because then the absence doesn't anymore feel as absence, then it kind of reveals itself or some,
Couldn't have said it better myself. So perfectly stated. Yeah. And then it's funny because we enter this place. It's like, well, what is here when the self is not here? When that is clarified, and the tendency to try to turn back to find a self is also subsided, what's here? Well, it's impossible to discuss. It's impossible to talk about. Language is just not structured to talk about it. But it's remarkable, and it's everyone's birthright, and it's possible and available to anyone, but they will go through things they didn't think they didn't even think they could go through.
Yeah, it's really crazy, wild, beautiful.
It is indeed. Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah.
So for me, what I felt came really online at that moment was this type of silence, was very different than from the silence that I was used to feel with this pure sense of I am, because that's also kind of like this inner stillness. It's always there. It's very organic. But this silence was different. Like, first of all, it was like not internal, because there's no internal anymore. And it would be absolutely just the same all the time, no matter what was happening in the waking mode or dreaming mode. And it just penetrated deep sleep, dreaming and waking, like kind of like this type of great silence that kind of pull it. And then the whole process was during the kind of many months that followed was just to die and fully surrender everything that was still just happening in the body mind, because there's no self anymore, but there's still remnants and echoes of the conditioned self somehow, and stored in the physicality. So all of that type of thing still was happening, and all of that just like was to be surrendered and the silence.
Yeah. Well.
So, but at some point then the silence and all that type of like great death, I guess, but it's very undramatic. It's very like, it just started to crossfade with this type of like renewal, like the senses, like the sense fields were just like almost like reborn.
Yeah.
And there's this sense like everything is happening for the first time, and it's so insanely fresh, like fresh and untainted. It's like totally immaculate and just like it's very like this deep well-being that's kind of like I feel releases like from the cells, like from the core of physicality itself, but the physicality is no more physical because it's just the emptiness pouring itself into beingness, but it's very rich and it's very like full and empty fullness, right? I think
empty clarity. Yeah, that Dogen also has another fun way of saying it. What I think is, he says, when one side is illuminated, the other side is dark. There's this profound empty clarity, this as you said, a sort of stillness that's not a mechanical stillness. It's not a caused stillness. It's just the fabric of everything. And at the same time, there's this beautiful, like, a luminous nature to all sense fields, because there's nothing filtering anything anymore. And that just radiant aliveness, it's intimate. Actually, it's intimate, not to a person or even a location. It's just intimate to itself, which is everywhere and everything already.
Yeah.
Right.
And
so
total unresearched intimate, like it's just like there's no choice to be intimate with this or that. It's just like it's like just the instinctual response of the physicality to just for aliveness and for embodiment. It's just like this and this and this and this, like my life at least, is very simple. It's like super simple this moment, and has been for many years. It's like so it's like kind of very ordinary and very, very simple, but at the same time it's beyond anything, that kind of human reality. But at the same time, it's been like this all along, and that's also super clear that this is how it's been all the time. And like that whole dream of consciousness getting entangled with thought and then liberating itself, it never touched this like one little bit.
It's almost like it never happened.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Well, it's been incredibly beautiful sharing this with you and sharing this with my channel. People are going to absolutely love it, I'm sure, get a lot out of it. And we're going to have questions and all that. But I just want to thank you again for your time and being willing to relate all of this for the channel. And I wish you all the best. I usually say to people, I wish you fruition, but you know what fruition is now. You live it. So I just wish you health and enjoyable life. And I'm sure everyone who comes in contact with you benefits greatly, even though you probably can't even tell. But I'm sure it happens. So
thank you so much. Yeah, it's been so good to have this conversation here. Yeah,
thank you.